Global Affairs analyst Michael Bosuku is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and a former spokesperson for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Michael, always good to see you. And we've just heard Claire's report really shedding light on the fact that you've seen drone production increasing rapidly. I mean, it's such an incredible story, and to see how the factory itself is expanding. We've seen a barrage of these attacks. Sometimes they last hours in Ukraine. What kind of advantage is it giving Russia?
Good to be with you. Well, quite a big advantage. I mean, President Putin has said he'd like to multiply drone production by 10 times, according to CNN reporting, to 1.4 million drones or so this year. And what Claire's report there hints at is that Western sanctions are almost becoming a joke, because not only are they using Chinese components, but according to Financial Times report today, there's also Western metalworking machinery being employed to make this equipment. So what we thought would have stopped Russia from producing weaponry with Western components isn't happening. Now, having said all that, Ukraine is not taking this sitting down in any way. Their drone production is headed to the hundreds of thousands, and this ranges from small kitchen tabletop productions to factory-based models that actually use jet engines and can strike with force and deep into Russia. One more thing, though, it has to be said, Claire mentioned the thermobaric warheads on some of the drones. Those are very devastating. We've seen firsthand in Ukraine what they can do.
Yeah, I know. And you actually live in Ukraine. You live in Odessa, so you live it firsthand. One thing that was quite interesting about Claire's reports as well is that a lot of the drones, some of the drones are actually dud drones, and they're used as decoys. We know a large percentage of the drones that infiltrate Ukrainian airspace are shot down. But what is Ukraine's capabilities to increase destroying these drones?
It's very, very difficult, because Ukraine is a large country the size of France, and what the Russians are doing and employing very evasive techniques, sending basically tsunami waves of drones, if you will, across the country that take very circuitous routes and then strike their targets, including, as you mentioned, those decoy drones. But the range of Ukrainian defenses are quite impressive. You have teams of volunteers literally standing on rooftops, shooting with rifles at some of the drones. And then you have the high-tech stuff. The problem with the high-tech air defense systems supplied by the West, it's very, very expensive to deploy them against these relatively inexpensive Russian drones. So we know very well that there's no inch of Ukraine now that can be considered safe because of these Russian attacks.
I mean, and we know what kind of devastation we're seeing here. We saw the strike on energy infrastructure on Christmas Day. There have been 13 strikes on energy infrastructure in Ukraine just this year. We also know that Russia has said they're now going into serial production for the Oreshnik, which is a completely new risk. And we know how absolutely terrifying that prospect is. Tell me about how people are feeling about these realities.
Well, they're scared. It's difficult to get into the twisted mind of Mr. Putin, but he has threatened to send several of these Oreshniks, ICBMs, to decision-making centers like Kiev. They are very powerful. Mr. Putin claims they can produce temperatures that rival the surface of the sun. They travel very, very fast. To give you an idea, they can cover the distance from Russia to Dnipro, about 800 kilometers, 15 minutes. That's equivalent to the driving distance from Washington, D.C. to Toronto. And again, if deployed in high numbers, they can produce a massive destruction. So Ukrainians are understandably very worried that he might act on his threats.
President-elect Trump is very against the fact that the Biden administration has done a massive U-turn and allowing for U.S. weapons to be used into Russian territory. What is your take on what Trump could do once he comes into office?
Sure. Well, if there's anything we learned from Trump 1.0 is it's difficult to believe anything he says, because he is the he presents himself as the master of the art of the deal, but he's also master of the art of bullying, deception, and so on. So I expect what will probably happen is he'll pressure Mr. Putin very early on to find some kind of settlement to this war, but it probably won't be on Ukraine's terms. Putin will say no, and then Trump will display his bravado, say, okay, we're giving Ukraine everything it needs. The problem with that, of course, is that Biden and his administration approach has not given Ukraine and wars. So they're very far behind. Let's see what happens.
Michael, yeah. Michael, I also want to get to the plane crash on Christmas Day in Kazakhstan. And of course, there's a lot of questions around what actually caused this. Sources are saying that it could be Russian air defense systems. What's your assessment?
Well, very quickly I worked the MH17 crash with the OSE in July 2014. And we saw very quickly on the side of the fuselage these very distinct pockmarks that eventually ended up being the signature damage from Russian Buk missile. I was shocked when I saw the fuselage of this Azerbaijani plane because they look very, very similar. So all evidence at the moment points to an explosion by a missile outside of that aircraft that, like MH17, made it unworthy, brought it down.
Oh, Michael, always good to speak to you. Always fantastic to get your insights. I wish you all the best. Thank you so much. Michael Boursiquot joining us. Thank you.